Welcome to the Forward Miami Show. I'm your host, Damian Pardo. And today I have Silvia Kaminsky with me, who's a licensed marriage and family therapist. And we're going to talk a little bit about adolescent mental health. Welcome, Silvia.
Thank you, Damien.
Pleasure having you.
You too. You too. Not normally the way we get together to just have fun, and
That's true.
we've known each other a long time.
That's absolutely
we
true.
both grew up.
We grew up together, and you certainly were one of those people who kept the group healthy mentally.
I'm stopped.
So
I'm
your
doing it for a
profession-
living now.
Exactly, your profession fits you well.
Yes.
I thought actually that's an interesting topic to start on, kind of like how times have changed from when we were growing up to today's environment, and maybe the kinds of things you see in your practice.
Well, gosh, I mean, where do we begin? We saw each other. We got together at the Coral Gables Youth Center or wherever we gathered. We didn't text or get together, or have relationships over social media. So it was a completely different environment of support, and they're very different.
And in terms of youth and adolescents, what do you see most now in your practice? What are kind of some of the issues that are bumping up?
Well, a lot of kids are, questioning, how to grow up, how to, they think that they need to know what to do to make a living. There's a lot of pressure to have the answers, to, to whether they, follow their parents', footsteps, or whether they become something very different. There's a lot of, we always talk about adolescents needing to differentiate from their parents to establish their own set of values, their own set of identity that may be very similar, but maybe very different from their parents. And that can be a tremendous time of stress.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think adolescents need a different identity from their parents?
Because they ultimately have to fend for themselves, and the world is very much the animal kingdom, evolutionary psychology that we still are very much have in common with other mammals. We have to be able to make it on our own, to survive on our own without our parents eventually. So it's innate in us to figure out how to go about that, and depending on the family dynamics, to stay connected to families as well, but that's not always the case.
Do you think there's a lot more pressure today for them to grow up quick?
No, quite the opposite.
Really?
Quite the opposite. As many parents can probably either sadly
You
or
yourself.
gladly attest to. COVID definitely has made it more interesting in terms of kids having to come back home and finish their education at home online, and also to when the job market is pretty good, but financially financially being able to support yourself, pay rents, et cetera, especially like a city like Miami, is difficult. So there are a lot more kids that are. Some parents would call it failure to launch.
Yeah, failure to launch?
Yeah, who's failure? That's the question. As a family therapist, it's usually a not just one party or the other that has the failure. It's usually the dynamic between and the family that.
And you think maybe with social media and movies and television, just everything else that's out there, that there isn't more pressure on them to kind of think through everything faster and mature on issues that maybe we wouldn't have touched on until our 20s or 30s. They're touching on those issues in their early teens.
Well, that's a good observation, but I think that there's a financial and a psychological divide. There might be a lot of advancement in terms of them identifying things psychologically and emotionally, and not necessarily correctly. I mean, because the brain takes many more years than we thought, even to fully develop into the 20s. So there's still a lot of development.
Can you talk
going on.
I'm fascinated by that. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I agree with that. I think the way I think it's the lifelong thing. I don't even think it's 20s, 30s. I know that there are awarenesses that I had in my 50s and 40s that I think I wasn't organically able to do it in an earlier age.
The brain is more pliable as you get older, although there could be cellular degradation along with that. But what's left is much more pliable. But I'm not a neuroscience expert, but what we know just as as marriage family therapists from what we keep up with in neuroscience is that young people easily develop their brains develop to about 25.
Mhm.
So, but yeah, I mean, I certainly, I think you might agree. There's certain things that we can be much more aware of. This much more integrated brain is what I would
Mhm.
say. It's a much more integrated brain the older you get.
So
Yeah.
when people kind of, because now you're seeing this debate play out in public policy, you're seeing uh, people kind of feel like certain topics, especially gender identity and sexual orientation, stuff like that, not to be talked about at the younger ages for
That is
developmental reasons.
such a controversial
Yeah.
topic, you know. Such a, I mean, it's children, you know, go through so many stages, you know, of exploration and healthy exploration when they're young, you know, where they may try on different roles and different, um, you know, different identities. Just, you know, it's play. We called it play, right? But but there are children that, you know, very much feel, you know, like the trans child who will. It's pretty consistent. It's pretty. It's not just a phase. You know, it is something that is developing and very convincingly. So there are, you know, parents that are being supportive and that are wanting to support that process early on with professional help and support, you know, not just on a whim. So it is, we're seeing much more of it. You know, who knows in the past how many of these children, well, we hear about them as adults, right? How many of them were oppressed or ridiculed or shamed or, you know, alienated or bullied. So it's an interesting area that still there's a lot of research and a lot of development.
It is really interesting. I remember reading a post that kind of struck me because I thought about what she was saying, and she was saying when I grew up, I was a tomboy. And this was her comment. It was a
Right,
comment on a thread.
right,
I was a tomboy. I used to play ball. I used to do all these things, and I'm really glad that I never had any of this, any of these topics of conversation because I never thought about them, and I was very happy, and I was just a tomboy. And later in life, as I grew up, it wasn't until her 20s that she came up with thinking that she was probably asexual. She
asexual.
asexual.
Oh,
And yeah, that she just didn't feel driven to anything.
okay.
You know what I mean? So it was interesting for me to hear what she was saying because it was kind of like I'm glad I grew up when I grew up because in today's world, I don't know how I would have been impacted by all of this. And I just thought that was such an interesting. It made me think. You know, like when we were all younger, you know, everybody had a little bit of effeminacy, a little bit of this or a little bit of that. It wasn't. You know, sometimes it was called out una pluma in Spanish, or,
A
you
feather.
know, a feather.
A feather.
You know,
Right,
but it was joking. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't bullying. It wasn't. You know, it was just kind of like a play with it, a play with everything.
right,
You know, and I feel like today there's almost a feeling of a need to classify. And,
right. Of having to choose when you're not ready to choose, or nor should you have to, you know, make that kind of a choice. Yeah,
right.
I mean, there. I agree. You know, I was very athletic before puberty, and you know, then once I went through puberty, I was like, well, I think I like makeup better. I think I like makeup and you know, fashionable clothes. You
Right.
know, even though I still enjoy. So you know, you go through those stages. If I had, you know, felt like, oh my God, you know, I'm really, you know, good at softball, or I'm really, you know, maybe that says something, you know, that I need to
Right.
explore
Right.
or more. Yeah, so I think this is a good place to insert, you know, the role of parents, you know, because, and the role of family in being affirmative, you know, that these are not, you know, I had it before much better than I'm articulating it now, but uh, you know, you don't have to feel the pressure. Parents don't have to feel so much pressure, you know, not to minimize or to discount, you know, what their child might be feeling or going through, but not necessarily feel quick to have to, um, to have to like just accept it either, you know, like as truth. You know, it could be. Uh,
Or get worried about it.
or get worried, yeah, or get worried, or you know, because of their own values might clash, you know, with what, you know, they're hearing,
Well, I
you know. So
remember. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I was thinking. I remember when I was young, and I would play football, but I also liked dolls. I liked the Barbie dolls, and so I
I think I
remember.
might have played with you.
Yeah, I mean, probably, but I remember that I liked everything, and I
Yeah, I
remember.
liked Hot Wheels.
Yeah, I
I
loved
loved
Hot Wheels.
I collected Hot Wheels.
So it was funny because you remember Olga,
Yeah.
the other girls on my block. So I would play with them and I would play with the boys. And what was funny was one Christmas I asked my mom for Ken,
A Ken
camper,
doll?
the camper,
Not
because
not for Ken, just the
no,
camper.
well, Ken came with the
Ken,
camper,
okay.
and so did Barbie.
Not
I think.
anymore. Now they price them differently.
They learned, but what I'm saying I thought was brilliant was my mom bought it. Like there was no discussion.
Well, your mom was special.
Yeah, there was
Yeah.
no discussion. It was
Yeah.
just like, okay, here you go. I think I used it once and left it because I had nobody to play with. You know,
Right.
It was unusual.
Right. Right. That was not unusual. I know my mom got a little nervous when my brother was playing, She didn't get nervous when the girls were playing with the Hot Wheels, but for some reason she got more nervous when he was like,
But that's kind of what you're
yeah,
suggesting, right? The
right.
parents just kind of go with the flow and not try to think that it's determining of anything.
Well, I just got back what I was thinking before that. You were describing yourself, and you've always, I mean, because I've known you, you have a pretty strong ego. You're pretty sure, you've always knew who you were, which is not always the case with younger people. But parents can help affirm that part of who the kid is, their strengths, their value as a person, and not attach so much to the labels or what the child might be thinking about or exploring, not to get so attached to it, and really focus on who they are and what they do with it, and their their habits, their thirst for knowledge, for studying, for being a good person. Just stay basic. Don't get hung up on the, what is it, the du jour, the
Label du jour.
the label du jour, right? Or because that does go through a lot of changes, and if you make it into a power struggle, or you make it into a rejecting stance early on, that's what stays. That process is what really puts a divide in the relationship with your child, and you want to keep that open door so that at any point they're struggling, that they know they can come talk to you. So reducing that judgment, that judgmental stance or that reactive stance. If parents need to work out their own stuff, it's a really good time during adolescence because it could really help, empower children.
That's fascinating. Talk a little bit about that. How does it reflect the parents' own stuff, and how do they know their own stuff from the child's stuff?
Um, a lot of self-awareness and a lot of like really fighting the tendency toward denial that we all have, and not wanting to look at our own childhood. A lot of parents, have forgotten their childhoods, and that's for a reason. They may have gone through a trauma or experiences that they pushed down, and then what happens oftentimes is that they relive that trauma or that memory when their child hits that age or that developmental stage. Adolescence is a hotbed of that because it's when kids want to be more independent, ask for, more freedom, separation from the parent. Like I said, that whole thing about launching. You can launch, physically, but maybe not emotionally. You're still. But anyway, parents. Yeah. So it's a time when parents may get confused and they may be parenting from their own experiences rather than what works for their child and what is happening contemporaneously, in children these days. So that's where a parent might benefit from doing some of their own work to create a boundary, as we call it, family therapy. We work a lot with boundaries, create a boundary. What's a you problem, what's a me problem, and then what's a relationship problem, that we need to work together at. It's very easy for parents to say, here, fix my kid, talk to them, I don't want to deal with it. What do you mean, you want me to move in? That's a whole different that's a whole different fee structure. I can't move in. Yeah. So you've got to learn how to navigate these conversations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think during COVID, a lot of parents saw curriculum that they were concerned about because they felt like whatever topics or whatever things were being covered in schools should be conversations at home. And you just hit on an important thing. Sometimes parents either are not ready to deal with it or don't want to, deal with whatever may be coming up. And how do you see how can parents bridge that divide between school and home and kind of so they're both working in the best interest of the child?
Parents are so busy, they're so overwhelmed, these days, that to do the kinds of things that are helpful really take a lot of planning and intentionality, because it means having conversations with the teachers and really understanding, what their role is and what they're doing, and then how parents can, supplement. So a lot of that collaboration is important. Um, but I don't know if that's what you're asking, in terms of, um, so you've got to be able to have significant contact with your kid. A lot of times it's just, put the food on the table, and maybe, you can learn some things during dinner time, right? And like asking, rather than like, okay, show me your homework log. Did you finish it? It's like all the checking the boxes. It's almost like you're a parole officer. Did you, did you, did you get in trouble today? It's like emergency. Already you're at the point of, a problem that you have to deal with, versus asking questions, be more involved just to find out what they're thinking, asking questions without an opinion, which is the hard part, right? Without, making it a teachable moment. We love that word, right? It's a teachable moment. Well, maybe not, maybe it's just a listening moment, and because there's a lot that, kids are afraid. I think there's a lot of fear in young people about whether they're going to be able to make it on their own. A lot of kids, like I was saying earlier, are just hanging around home, or coming home and hanging around until they feel they're capable of being able to financially, be on their own. So there's a lot of fear to figure it out and to.
I'm curious, what do you consider good parenting?
Oh God,
How,
do we have another? Oh my gosh, there's an old expression in our field that's called the good enough mother, the good enough parent, where if you think of, there's no such thing as perfection. There's trial and error. I think being human and admitting your mistakes, and not thinking like, my kid is not going to do anything that I did, and so you cut off from that part, that there was a reason why you went through difficulty, that there was a strength in making mistakes and figuring things out, and being authentic. Kids can smell. Can I say a bad word? BS? Okay. They smell BS in parents very easily, so it's like that's just creates a lot of lack of credibility and respect. So it's not, there's no easy answer. It's just being willing to be open and to have, well, of course there's things like you're still in charge, right? I mean, you're still paying the bills. You talked about guardrails. I mean, there's boundaries. There's you have to lay the law. You just can't be like egalitarian. Like you're all adults living together when they're not adults yet. So there's that give and take of being supportive and nurturing, but being very clear about what's acceptable or not. But that has to start younger. Parents a lot of times get really afraid in adolescence. They're like, oh, I'm going to lay the law down. But before it was like
free world.
Free world. It's like, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, the kids don't listen to me.
That's a great point. How do you start laying the law? I mean, how do you
building relationship?
Even from like 3, 4, 5. I mean,
oh,
what
from
are we
laying the
talking
law?
about? Yeah, like
it's teaching them how to be a human being. You pick up your toy after you put it. It's not that hard. It's like it doesn't have to be like done like an expert housekeeper. It's just teaching them self-efficacy. Teaching them self-efficacy, like they can.
I'll
Kids
see
can do a
some
lot of
parents
things.
with their child. The child is 13 and they're still cutting the food on the plate. And they're thinking, "Oh my God,
you've been at my house?" No,
oh my God, you're one of those."
No, I don't do that one, but
in my mind, I'm thinking, "Wow, like I think I was probably doing that at 4."
Like I said, your mom was special.
Yeah. She's like, "You want food? You'll figure it out."
Right. Yeah.
It just became manners at a later age.
Right.
This is the way you hold the fork. This is the way you.
That's true. Yeah. No, parents have a lot of pressure too to do what they think in terms of what it takes to be a good parent, which is to make life easier for their kid. And sometimes not letting kids be challenged and figuring things out and learning and making mistakes and falling off the bicycle and all the things that you do that we learned, I mean,
Yeah.
when we were little, because
Like you just said, we had guardrails. We had neighbors that watched and that had the
maybe
time to
too
watch.
much sometimes.
Sometimes too much. The
Busybodies.
Kravitzes.
Right. Kravis.
Nobody will but we had schools, we had community, we had sports after, we had things that, and I think today, just by the virtue of social media and the phone,
Hmm.
there was a great segment on 60 Minutes, not, I have to diverge, about a kid that saved the bus. He got on and he took the wheel of the bus and put on the
Oh,
brake
I heard about that.
and saved it. And
Right.
what was funny is they interviewed all the kids on the front of the bus. And they were all in their phones, or they had iPods on and were listening to music. Nobody
Oh, I
was
didn't hear that part.
situationally aware. And the child was situationally aware because his parents didn't allow him to have a phone.
Right.
So this kid saved the bus. The funny part is that when they were interviewing the kid, they were saying, "So you saved the bus," and he just was fit to be tied with his parents. He's like, "Yeah, they don't let me have a phone." Like you could
And
tell
one day he will
wanted to
thank
kill
his
them.
parents for that.
Absolutely, but
Yeah.
there's a good example of where in today's world we're losing that situational awareness even for adults that sometimes is really that organically as animals that we were our DNA was set up for was to be situationally aware,
Right. Right.
and with social media, just with all this stuff, it's I think changed guardrails for kids. They can do things and go places through a phone that were never options.
Right. Right. It puts a lot more pressure on parents to, be involved and to talk about, their usage. And, there's guidelines. I was just listening to a psychologist on TV that's even trying to legislate the guidelines, trying to, on social media, for regulate the usage at a certain age, 12, then older. But just family practices like not allowing cell phones on in the dining room table, put them, make a pretty basket and everybody puts them in there, or not letting, kids go to sleep at night with not having electronics in the bedroom, which I actually did that. I didn't allow electronics in the bedroom. You know, they were TV was outside of the
Yeah.
bedrooms, computer, laptops, I mean, until probably senior year, until they got
Yeah.
more demanding, as they got older. But yeah, those things are important guardrails that parents still need to be very much
What were
involved.
some things you think worked well for you with your kids?
Well, that's a very loaded question. Because as you know, I suffered a major loss. My kids suffered a major loss of their father, my husband, when they were freshmen in high school. And so I I had to adopt both, roles, and that was an adjustment, because parents naturally tend to work together. One has strengths, one has weaknesses. So um, I think, what worked well was starting young. By the time that they were teenagers, they understood what the expectations were, and they understood, um, uh, that they could talk and say things, that things, nothing was too crazy, I guess,
Mhm.
as if you say them, it's different than acting out, or dealing with feelings in a way that is destructive, or not productive. So I mean, that's one advantage, I think, as a mental health provider, being aware of some of these things. But when they still hit you, they're still as hard as anybody else. You have to deal with them. But that, I guess I think starting young is very important. Although it's never too late, but it takes a lot of work to start, putting good communication habits in place. By the time they're adolescents, you said earlier, what can parents do, when they have to start laying, putting those disciplinary actions that they may never have employed before. When they're teenagers, you can't use the same ones. If you do, you're gone. I mean, you're so fired, and it's not pretty, and it's dangerous. I mean, the increase in children, thinking about suicide or that self-mutilate has gone, I think 2021 statistics was like 22%, and kids that are reporting mental health issues are, up to 46, almost 50%. So there's there are a lot of risks involved, in adolescence. It's important that parents build that relationship with their teen while they're thinking about putting more boundaries on their kids, while they're thinking about putting restrictions. And it's got to feel like a collaboration, a give and take, a negotiation. It's not, because if you didn't have that, working well up to that point, you've got to do a little bit of makeup time with that. And that's important. That's a good time to seek a family therapist out for help with that.
I was just going to say, at what point would a parent know that they need help, that things are out of control?
Well, obviously, when their child has anything from the extreme of a child attempting suicide or threatening suicide, or
What about,
cutting
I mean,
themselves
children, and I've
using,
found this,
substances.
I found this in my own family. The children are kind of on to a lot of things. I mean, I know in my family, someone just would talk about suicide because they wanted a certain outcome. It was more manipulative. It was a manipulative strategy than a real. So, like for parents who a child might, how does a parent discern? I guess if you ever hear that, you treat it like it's
Yeah. You can't even just the fact that that's going on is dysfunctional. Right?
Of
That's a
course.
way to get your needs met or to negotiate a relationship, right? You can imagine how that plays out into adulthood. We hear about that, right?
Yes, exactly.
So it's a pattern that gets set in, and it'll continue if you don't take care of it. So yeah, parents lost control by that point, and so getting that control back really comes from going back to basics and healing wounds in the relationship, the parent-child relationship that occurred much younger in life, and you have to do that work, in order for a kid to find you credible and somebody that they want to follow. If they don't respect you, it's very difficult. It's very
Do you
difficult
think that's
to
the
be in
most
control.
important aspect of
Mutual
our
respect.
discussion?
Yes, mutual respect. The mutual respect for the child being an individual, being different. That means not violating boundaries, and that is by excessive physical, discipline and physical ways of managing the relationship. Anytime you violate a boundary, whether it's by hitting or by screaming or by belittling, you're violating. It's a disrespectful experience. It doesn't teach respect or self-control or lead by example. It just teaches them to take care of business the same way, and it's going to come back at you. He's just like, yeah.
Wow. If parents are looking for resources on these issues, where can they go? What would you recommend as a good?
Oh wow. My professional association, the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy, which I'm currently the president, serving as the president of the board of directors, their website is helpful, aamft.org. The Pediatric Association, aamft.org.
AAM, like Manny?
Like, that's funny, you should mention that name.
AAMFT.com.
Okay. Yes.
Or .org.
.org.
Okay.
.org. The American Pediatric Association is a good source. NIMH, NAMI, the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill. There's a lot of organizations but your provider, your child's medical provider is a really good place to start.
So they're primary?
Your pediatrician, yeah, they're pediatrician.
Oh, that's a great
that's
suggestion.
really one of the best resources.
And how do friends and community work fill in here? How does that help? Sometimes parents try to control the friends of the kid. How are there other tips that they can?
Yeah, that can be tricky.
Yeah.
Parents typically don't like other parents telling them what to do because it
No, but I mean,
Yeah.
just in terms of choosing friends that are like the kind
Oh,
of
oh,
with
I
the
see what you're
values that they
saying.
want for their kids. You know how sometimes
Oh,
parents,
that's, oh, that takes me back to judgment. Oh,
okay,
they,
yeah,
they have a nose ring. No, I don't want to. Yeah, it's like stuff that doesn't really say a whole lot about,
right.
you have to spend time with your kids' friends and to really know if they're a good role influence, a good role model, and so it's very
So, like you
difficult.
said, we're living in an era where there's very little time. It's a commodity. But I think it sounds from what you're saying, the most important thing you can do is spend time with your kids. Don't judge, listen, hold yourself back
Hmm.
before, think about it before coming back with feedback to engage.
Yeah, before you come with your own value judgment or your own uh, one of my things with my kids was like deferring to their 18. Because you can make so many decisions once you're really responsible for yourself. So it wasn't like up to me,
Right.
It's like, but we talk about the pros and the cons and the consequences of what that means, and they change their mind. Lo and behold, if you make it a power struggle when they're 12, they're gonna get that tattoo or they're gonna
Yeah.
get that earring like yesterday, right?
Yeah.
But if you just engage the conversation. What does that mean? They may end up, that way, fine, but they'll be old enough to make that decision, or, you know. But we're mostly like controlling,
Yeah.
whether we like to admit it or not. We're most like controlling the outcome that we would like for our child and what we think constitutes success. And sometimes there's a circuitous road to success. It's not a straight line that takes 4 years of high school, 4 years of college, or whatever graduate school. It's everybody has a different time frame and a different path. And the most important thing is that they know who they are, that they, you know their needs and take care of their needs in healthy ways.
Well, that's great. I mean, that's actually a good place to close on. I told you that half an hour goes by really fast. I want to thank you
Oh, you're
for
welcome.
joining with us. And is there anything else? Any closing thoughts you feel you'd like to leave people with?
Hope, hope
Hope.
and love. I mean, I think that find a way to fall in love again with the people, your children, and see the positive in them, because it's very easy for people to be scapegoated and typecasted into being a certain person, and that's really unfair. I think it's important to let people be who they are, and set boundaries, with things that are not for you.
No, actually beautiful words. Thank you. I
Sure,
appreciate that.
sure.
And for everyone out there, thank you very much for joining us for the Forward Miami show. And we look forward to seeing you again next week.
Thank you. Thank you for having me,
No, pleasure.
Damian. Yeah.